edition of the Acadiana Press Club Forums. We're happy that you're able to join us here in person today, the Daily Advertiser, or for those of you watching us at home right now on the Acadiana Open Channel, we thank you for tuning in as well this evening. Budget cuts are coming up. We know they're going to happen, and the folks in the education sector are frankly scared. After all, education is one of the few mandates that is not protected under the state constitution. And with the upcoming session coming, members of the education sector, especially higher education in Louisiana, are wondering what is going to happen to us. And today, that is what we are here to talk about. We have several members of the higher education sector in Louisiana joining us today. Starting on my far left, your right, Dr. Joseph Rallo, the new chairman of the Board of Regents. To his left, I can't see, I see shaking your head. Did I mess it up?
Commissioner of Higher Education.
Commissioner of Higher Education, thank you. You're so new, I don't even remember what your title is. Dr. Natalie Harder, who is the president of SLCC here in Lafayette. Dr. Sandra Woodley, who is the president of the UL system. Dr. King Alexander, the president of LSU and the president of UL Lafayette. Dr. Joseph Savoy. We'll go ahead. I will let you guys open up with opening statements. I'll start off on my far left, Dr. Ratliff.
Good, thank you very much, and I appreciate being here. I was here a few weeks ago, so it was fun to come back. What I thought I'd do very briefly in my few minutes is to sort of give you an overview of the budget issue, and then turn to my colleagues, or allow my colleagues, because they're more involved, obviously, with the allocation. And so, just so everyone recognizes, I've been here since January, first part of January, and literally we've been working, if not daily, certainly close to that, on working with our legislative colleagues on resolution and solutions to these issues. By March 31st, by law, the Board of Regents that I work for has to submit the initial budget estimate to the legislature. So our Board of Regents meeting on the 25th of March will basically go through the following calculation. We have roughly $1 billion that we as the leadership in higher ed say that we need to be able to do all the things, base funding, WISE, TOPS, all the things that are essential to a competitive higher education program in Louisiana. So right now, in the proposed executive budget, there is approximately $400,000 in the budget, with an additional contingency amount of about $372. So that brings us to about $762. But if you back TOPS away from that, which has to be fully funded, we're now $236 less than we had this past year. The second thing is, and again, we believe that the contingency will be there, but if the contingency is not there and you fully fund TOPS, we have a base funding available to allocate of $123 million. And so as we begin to look going into this, we start from that billion and you take away the $390, which is the money that is being provided in the budget, then worst case scenario, and again, we do not believe this to be the case, but worst case is $608 million less than we currently have. So again, I don't want to leave people with despair by any means. I'm very optimistic and I think upbeat type of person, but as the leadership around the table, we have to come to grips with the numbers that are there as well as the numbers we believe will be there. And my last thing I'd like to say is, I know we're talking about budgets, but I would hope people would recognize that higher ed right now is undergoing all sorts of challenges. That once we get past the budget issues, you've got all sorts of things, for example, distance education. When 50% of high school students by 2019 will be taking online classes, what does that mean when they come to us? Adult learners in Louisiana, the bulk of half the people in Louisiana, the adults have a high school or less credential, and the majority of jobs need credential at least the community or technical college level. Competency-based education, giving credit for competencies, lowering time to degree, and obviously the loss of state funding, not just in Louisiana. So I hope that you recognize that we are working on a lot of things that go beyond just simply the budget issue. The budget is important. We believe what we solve positively, but at the same time, there are other things that we have to do to make sure that we, as I always say, we need to graduate students, but we need to graduate students who can compete. And with that, that's my time.
Dr. Rallo, thank you. Dr. Harder.
Thank you, and I'd like to continue on that conversation about the budget as a whole, remembering that I appreciate the opportunity to represent the LCTCS system, but also South Louisiana Community College. And the fact is that the proposal that came out by the governor is just that, a proposal. There isn't anybody in this room or on this panel who hasn't heard from legislators and higher education advocates and leaders throughout the state that these types of cuts to higher ed just do not move our state to providing the workforce that our institutions need to provide. Important is to maintain the WISE Fund, workforce innovation, so that we can continue to close the skills gap, things like rapid response and the ability for our institutions to be more autonomous and be creative and innovative as we work to meet the needs of Louisiana. Clearly, many of us, particularly when I look at my own institution's programs, many of our technical programs are the things that lead to revenue solutions in this state, not expense problems. When you can graduate individuals that go into a high demand, high wage job and that immediately turn around and pay property taxes and sales taxes, those are revenue solvers, things that contribute to the revenue. They should not be seen purely as an expense without any return on investment. Thank you.
Dr. Little?
Thank you. I've been here for 2 years, and it always strikes me as odd when the conversation rolls around the investment in higher education. I think we have to find a way to continue to invest in something, as Dr. Harder says, will increase the economy, the economic development in Louisiana. Last year, all of our colleagues got together and promoted an agenda with budget stability, keeping the tuition revenue, and $40 million for the WISE Fund that we believed and put a lot of work into very sophisticated strategic plans around really ramping up our production, particularly in the high demand fields. Louisiana has, as you know, a very low educational attainment rate. In our system, we produce a little less than 17,000 degrees a year, but we really need to double those numbers over the next 10 or 15 years if we have any chance at taking advantage of the economic development gains that have happened in the state. We need more education, not less. We need more people in our system. We need more adults, as Dr. Rallo says, who can take advantage of these programs and get an education. And then when they get their degree, as Dr. Harder says, they contribute to the economy and the tax base. What we're faced with, I think, with these potential budget reduction is really not necessarily just a problem for higher education, although it is a problem for higher education. This is a Louisiana problem. This is a problem that will reverberate far beyond the higher education system if more than half of the state funds are cut at a time when the institutions have lost money every single year for their programs. I'm also optimistic. I think we're going to find a way to find a solution for this problem. I think we have to do that for ourselves and for the state. But I think it's going to be very important that we focus on the main issue. And the main issue here is we have to educate more students. We need more students in the pipeline, and we have to fill those job gaps.
Dr. Alexander?
Yes. First of all, we're going to need your help as we go forward. That $608 million, as Commissioner Rallo points out, is about an 82% reduction for us. These are almost cartoon-like numbers that I'm trying to deal with it. The challenge, though, I think, as we go forward, starting from up high, is that our 55 to 64-year-old population in the United States ranks #1 in the world in college degrees. Our 25 to 34-year-old population ranks 12th, and it's declining each and every year, compared with OECD, other countries dropping each year. In addition to that, think of that 12th. We're 49th in a country that ranks 12th. We're 49th as a state in the number of adult population with college degrees. We have the educational needs right here in Louisiana. More importantly, we've got more needs than most states do. And what we're trying to do by producing more graduates, enrolling more students, needs to be a continual effort on the part of our citizens, not to back away from the next generation of students, but to help invest in those next generation of students. Before this budget cut even happens, before 10% up to 82% happens, our per student spending at LSU, per student, everything put in the hat, of 50 flagship universities in this country, we rank 46th in what we're able to spend per student. Now, some people might say that's great, that's very efficient as an institution. Well, that is efficient, but at some point that catches up with you. And I don't know how many parents in this state want to hear me say that you ought to come to LSU because we'll spend less on your child than anybody else in the country. That's not a good selling piece that we have. So that's the starting point. The starting point is that we're down 2,000 employees from where we were a decade ago. We're down 363 faculty members from where we were a decade ago. So that's before another cut, a single cut happens. So that's where we're starting. And right now, that's the starting point. With the new budget that we're looking at, we're going to have an awful lot of mitigations in this budget to help us get whole, to help us be able to provide what we promised to our students, to help us be able to provide what we promised to the next generation of students, of which the latest Gallup poll said the largest number of parents in the history of this country said they wanted their kids to go to school, to college. 93%. 93% of our parents want them to go to college. And it is not the time to pull our investments back or to continually pull our investments back in public higher education. Thank you.
Well,
thank you. Let me first thank my colleagues from the state who are working real hard to try to work through some solutions. I appreciate the fact that they've come here to Acadiana and Lafayette to help inform our citizens about some of the things that are going on. And I appreciate that they're working closely together. I know they meet on a regular basis. And that's very, very important because we have to have a single voice as we try to inform people and work through these challenges. Driving over this morning, I made a mistake and I came down St. Mary Avenue right when classes were changing. And I got stopped for about 15 minutes as students were crossing the road at various places. But it reminded me of an economic impact analysis that was done a few years ago, recently updated, dealing with the impact of each one of those students. Each one of those students, about 18,000 or so, has a $20,000 a year economic impact on Lafayette and Acadiana. So if you add that up real quickly, you can see that in areas of food, housing, cars, insurance, banks, social activities, clothing, all those things contributing to businesses here from those students. And the university has been fortunate to be able to continue to grow our enrollment, but it's becoming more and more difficult as these budget challenges face us. But as they're dealing with the statewide impact and kind of the national implications, on a local basis, besides those 18,000 students, we have about 1,500 employees who are shopping our grocery stores, who are buying clothes for their family, who are paying insurance, who are buying homes, who are living in apartments, who are contributing to the economic vitality of our community, of which we're very proud. The university plays a big role in that. We write thousands of checks to hundreds of businesses in Lafayette and Acadiana. Coming up down Cajun Boulevard here, and I saw the new CGI building and all the construction vehicles that were there. All those people were employed because of the university. When we bring in CGI with their 600 highly paid technical employees, they're going to be looking to buy houses and have doctors and nurses and put their money in banks and contribute to this economy. So it's more than just the issues that are facing the colleges in our day-to-day operations. It's really about the economic vitality of communities here in Lafayette and throughout the state where we have colleges and universities. So it's important that you're here to discuss this. It's important that these statewide leaders are here to help us understand it and press the message, and I appreciate all of you being here.
Thank you again for being here. And just a couple of notes. We invited Senator Eric LaFleur of the Senate Education Committee. He was scheduled to be here today, but unfortunately could not join us. Another note that we should mention, Dr. Salvo, because of another commitment, will be leaving us a little bit early this afternoon. So if you see him shuffle out, that's why. It's not because he's trying to avoid us.
Either that or the police are waiting for me.
That too. We'll go ahead and open up questions to the floor, and as usual, for members of the press club, we'll go ahead and give you first priority to ask your questions. So we'll go ahead and start with anybody on the floor who has questions. We'll go ahead and start with the gentleman in the back.
Yeah, about 7 years ago, we did an economic impact study that President Salvo referred to. And one of the other things we discovered was that every dollar that we spent on a student had a $7 multiplier. I wonder if it's time to do one for the whole state to look at the economic impact, because we did it only for the UL system. We did it as H strong at that time, but we're dying now in the system, but there's so many more in the state. I wonder if we could come up with a number that says, here's the economic impact for every dollar that you spend on higher education in the state. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and start off with Dr. Satwa. Go the other way.
Okay. Oh, you want
No,
to
respond, yes.
Well, I think I did kind of in my opening comments, and yeah, I mean, the impact that I talked about here in Acadiana is multiplied in communities throughout the state. LSU with a statewide mission and multiple campuses throughout the state has a significant impact on the state's economy and the state's competitiveness. You know, the number of graduates that are produced by by institutions throughout the state. We produce about 3,000 new college graduates every year who are the backbone of the workforce of this community. Most of the doctors and most of the nurses and teachers and people going to professional schools and the entrepreneurs. They can choose to stay here or go elsewhere. And they're going to go to a state that has a kind of lifestyle and environment that they can thrive in. If you're cutting your lifeblood, that's not the kind of environment that young people are attracted to.
Dr. Alexander?
And I'll point out, I appreciate the question, because one of the first things I did roughly about 2 years ago in getting to LSU is to measure the economic impact of LSU. And that's everything from Crowley, our best research station in the world, to our medical centers in Shreveport and New Orleans. And we calculated it's about a $4 billion impact to Louisiana. And that's about, and it also contributes about 1.5 billion in sales, which is what the president was talking about. The sales, the amount of generated activities, but more importantly, it's 37,000 jobs. There's 37,000 jobs. That's just LSU. So all of these, if people don't think that they have a direct or indirect impact, they really need to carefully look at these numbers and understand that many businesses are here because of that. Last year's graduating class, the largest African-American graduating class in history at LSU, the largest Latino graduating class in history at LSU, and the largest female graduating class in the history of LSU. That has tremendous impact on this state and the new jobs, the new economy that is going to be created. These students and graduates are going to create a new economy somewhere. We just want them to create it here because we've already invested in them to get them to college, over $100,000. To get them to this point in their lifetime where they're getting ready to go to college. Let's not let another state top them off. By that I mean they pull them into their state, they spend a little bit amount of money while we spent the bulk of the investment already in each boy and each girl in this state. So that's what we're advocating for here today.
Dr. Whitley.
And I think, you know, the economic impact studies, and as you know, we did that a few years ago, maybe it is time to renew that. I think it points out kind of another myth that we need to pay attention to. The myth that somehow our problems in higher education could be eliminated if somehow we closed the college or merged college. You know, the Board of Regents studied that issue and put out a report in 2013 that basically said that's not true. Not only that, it costs you money if you close the colleges, but think how much more value that we could give to this state if we were able to have the resources at all of our institutions to increase enrollment and to increase degree production. Think of how many more companies would choose to come to Louisiana if we really had the machinery working that allowed us to pump out these graduates, particularly in these high demand fields. And you know, my background is chief financial officer. I was chief financial officer in 4 university systems, and maybe I know too much about what drives college costs, but the truth is what drives the expenses and the costs in college is, for the most part, the students that you serve. We have about 90,000 students in the University of Louisiana system, but if we were to be on target to achieve our plans, we need to double the number of degrees that we produce. We'll have to significantly increase enrollment. We'll have to significantly increase enrollment in the adult population. Those students who have some college but no degree, to be able to take advantage of the economic growth that's happening in Louisiana. So I think, you know, the economic impact, as Dr. Savoy said, of each one of our universities in their communities, all the tentacles of benefit and economic benefit that happens not just in the classroom, but also in the economic business activity in the community. but also the fact that we badly need to ramp our numbers up. Louisiana is among the states with the lowest educational attainment rate. And if we could increase that, it not only increases the economic vitality, but it also can change a lot of people's lives, and we hope to be able to do that.
Dr. Harder.
Well, I think of two things. First of all, last year, the LCTCS compared the Social Security numbers of our May graduating class and our December graduating class with unemployment insurance information. And last year's graduating class earned $723 million. That's not a multiplier, that is just pure salary, $723 million. So when I talk about us being part of the revenue solution, look at the fact that Louisiana Workforce Commission estimates that you pay back about 7.5% of your gross income back to the state in taxes. We all benefit as we graduate more individuals. As Dr. Woodley noted, the ability to serve the population that has some college and no degree is going to be crucial to our success. We have about 2.3 million individuals in the working adult population. Only 670,000 of them have a college degree. There are about 500,000 with some college and no degree, and about 550,000 with only a high school equivalent, 600,000 with no high school equivalent. When you think about economic impact, it is the spending, it is the multiplier, but what about the savings to the state as we move individuals up the educational attainment rate and decrease the social cost to our state? When you think about the things that folks indicate that we quote unquote compete with in terms of funding, incarceration, health care, those types of cost decreases, educational attainment increases. So we really need to focus on the educational attainment numbers in the state and how we grow them, not shrink them.
Dr. Rollo.
Well, I agree with everything. When I came from Texas, I was the vice chancellor for the Texas Tech University system, and we lobbied our legislature as we do here. And one of the things we went and we talked about is the role of public higher education, which goes beyond just the economic impact, although that's very important. But we would point out the number of alumni in each district, the number of students in each district, to remind our legislative friends, our legislative colleagues, that we are indeed the future. And the same thing here in Louisiana. I think we do a good job, maybe should be doing a better job of reminding the folks that really public and public higher education carries with it talking about the future fabric of our communities as opposed to just looking at graduates. And so I think that that's why I've been an advocate of public higher education for years and years and years, and I think that that's the message we have to take away. We are really the future, as my colleagues have pointed out, of this state.
You know, we don't lobby, we provide
I'm sorry.
information.
Claire, I saw your hand go up earlier.
Well, okay, it just seems like every year we hear that higher ed is getting cut, you know, and y'all have to go and work your magic, and this year it seems particularly deep. What can y'all do at this point, and what are you doing? Other than just begging legislators don't do this, you know?
Well, I think we have to prepare for the worst, and we have to work for the best. And I think as Dr. Alexander pointed out, you know, getting the $1 billion back in the higher ed budget that we're requesting isn't a windfall. I mean, we're still sometimes $1,000 to $2,500 per student lower than our statistical peers whose graduation and retention rates we're chasing. When you look at our performance, we actually do outperform our resources by quite a mile. But as Dr. Alexander also said, there's a limit to our ability. I mean, the efficiency, I think, you know, we're there. What we need is more resources so we can hire faculty. That was included in our WISE plan so that we can increase enrollment and graduation rate. So we are focusing almost all of our energy on finding a solution. And as Dr. Rallo said, we have friends in the legislature and in the governor's office who also wants not to have to cut higher education $608 million. But it's a complicated pathway between here and the end of the session when we get there. As far as our campuses are concerned, we've asked them to work very hard at their own internal planning to look at what are the major challenges and what are the issues should any version of a cut happen. At this point, you know, it is cartoonish to think about a 60 to 80% cut. I mean, you can't really even prepare for that. But even if the institutions, and some of ours, even if they receive a 5 or a 10% cut, with the margins so thin, it can be very detrimental to their ability to continue to provide quality programs. So we're planning, we're looking at system-wide policies that would allow more flexibility if some level of cuts do roll in. So all of those things are in play, but we're focusing on doing the work while we're there, and a solution that gets us back to at least that $1 billion that we need to maintain, where we are now.
From the board's perspective, we're using two words. We're using significant and sustainable. So what we're really trying to work on is significant dollars to bring us to what we believe is essential to deliver the quality of education we've talked about, including things like WISE and TOPS, but also sustainable. So we get past this every year having to sort of put up this little sticky note mentality with respect to budgeting. And, as a former president, as a provost, and I think I can speak for everyone here, we also want to get rid of uncertainty every year. We can plan, but it's very difficult to plan against uncertainty. So we want the certainty, we want sustainability, and we want significant resources.
It's about choices. We're spending $7 billion in tax credits in a $16 billion state. We're asking for $1 billion for sustainability for the next generation of students. And this is about making the right choices. We choose to spend $35,000, $38,000 to incarcerate somebody and $5 to educate them. This really boils down. This is about our own choices. As a public, it's about our own choices. As legislators, it's about what we want this state to be in the future. And when people say, how do you deal with this in tough economic times? Quite simply, there are about 3 states going through this right now, not 50, which went on in 08, 09, and required federal stimulus dollars that helped us survive. The federal stimulus dollars aren't coming now. I mean, these are about making the right choices for the next generation of children and students in this state. And we need to make those right choices and make those hard decisions and get us turned around so we start focusing on the next generation.
Dr. Harder, Dr. Sama, you want to respond?
Well, I would just say that to try and find some level of positive feeling is that it gives us the ability to have serious conversations in the legislature about autonomy, about how it is that we could be more creative and more innovative and handle changes in the economy if we had the ability to have some autonomy. So I think there's a positive way that as we're providing information to encourage them to think about allowing us to be a little more freer and operate the way most higher education institutions do in other states.
Just to piggyback on top of that, we get about 13% of our state funding, our flagship institution, from the state, 13%. If this budget goes unmitigated, we're down to 2.9% from the state. So why not seek autonomies? Why don't you just give us autonomies to do what we know we can do without the constraints when we're only 3% funded from the state or even 13% funded from the state? Let us be more efficient. Let us operate the way we can. Let us play by the market rules, and let us do what we can do as an institution.
I think all that's good, and I think the conversations are important, and it's not just a matter of additional revenue, it's a matter of how we're allowed to do business. We spend an inordinate amount of our operating dollars on compliance with various state regulations, and we have auditors who audit auditors who audit auditors. I mean, get a good auditor and leave the rest of them alone, But generally, the state, you can look at the rankings, I don't know whether we're 45th, 47th, or 50th on revenue. This is we don't have a spending problem, we have a revenue problem. We don't have enough revenue to invest in the things that are important to the state. It gets more complicated because of all the dedications of that limited amount of revenue. So, a lot of these rules and regulations and laws that were passed in the past, despite what some of their authors may think, laws are not divinely inspired. They're not commandments. I mean, they're rules that came about to try to address a particular problem at a particular time, a particular context. Well, the context is different now. We don't need to give people credits for drilling, for fracking, because now they're shutting wells down. I mean, it doesn't make much sense to continue to do that sort of thing, and there are just dozens and dozens of those things that took place in the past because of a particular reason to solve a particular problem that no longer exists. Now we have new problems, and we need new solutions, we need new ways of dealing with that. And I'm confident that these leaders, working with the leaders in the legislature, can get that done. It's time to deal with today's problems, today's issues, so that we can prepare for the future.
You mentioned tuition, Dr. Alexander. I have to ask, if you had the ability to set tuition for the LSU system, or even LSU, the main campus in Baton Rouge, what would tuition be if you had your way, if you were able to make that decision yourself?
Well, the interesting thing about currently with the TOPS program, we're the biggest beneficiary of TOPS in the state because we require a 3.0 to get in and need a 2.5 to qualify for TOPS. Our students now are paying about $1,000 a semester in tuition and fees. These are Louisiana students. And you couple that with what's also going on at the federal level and the American Opportunity Tax Credit, which is now up to $2,500, so 55 to 60% of our parents are getting $2,500 back in April. So there's been an awful lot of mitigation for middle income parents, specifically in a state that has a merit-based student aid program. Currently, we have so much room to expand and to generate. We're about $2,500 below our peers in what we charge. But our state is very generous on the merit-based scholarship program that helps mitigate all those costs. So we think we have room to move in this way. We don't want to overcharge. We don't want to charge more than our peers, but we just want the flexibility to charge as much as some of our peers to go after the same faculty, to go after the same staff, to go after the same students that we're in competition with. That includes UCLA, Ohio State, Minnesota. These are the schools we're up against when we're trying to hire a petroleum engineering faculty member, of which our student to faculty ratio is 82 to 1 right now. And so demand is up 35% from our students. We just don't have the funds to provide faculty in the classroom to keep those numbers at a reasonable rate. So we just want to be able to compete. We're not asking for more money than others. We're not asking to charge more than others. We know we will outperform them, but just allow us to play in the game. Allow us to be in the game.
And I think if I could piggyback on that, you know, the tuition autonomy and the fee autonomy and some of the autonomies that we talked about, I think is important for all of us for long-term flexibility. When you look at tuition prices, it's important to note that it is not a one-size-fits-all in the state. Institutions that serve relatively lower income populations who get less money from TOPS will have a more difficult time increasing tuition at all. Some of our institutions are pretty much capped out. Some of our institutions do have cap room and still be competitive and it still be affordable. But I want to also say that's another reason why it's important to have multiple strategies that work for every kind of university in the state. If the flagship has the ability under the affordability and the competitiveness to increase their rate and still maintain affordability and high quality, they should be allowed to do it. And it's also true that we have to find a way in this state to give more public funds to the university system, so those who serve the lowest income population in a state that has very little need-based financial aid, those students can also be served, and we don't price those students out. And so I think it is important to look at that each institution has its own universe of students within which they serve, and they're not all the same.
Dominic Cross first, we'll come back to you, sir.
You know, the conversation that's been going on here it sounds to me like it's all about economics. And, you know, to a certain degree it is. And then talking about letting the market go to market-led help and being independent and running your own game to fund your own school. To me, it's you know, it's education, it's people. It's not a business. It's a business, but it's about people. And when you look at what's going on in secondary schools across this country with the charter schools and all this stuff, and now you guys here in this situation that you're in, I mean, is there or is there not a war on education?
I think each state, as Dr. Alexander indicated earlier, has to make a decision whether higher education is a public benefit or a private good.
Public benefit, easy.
Well, it's both. And so it's the continuum on which, I mean, because it's a private benefit too. Obviously, a student gets a great benefit when they graduate and they're
It's
salary.
individual private, not the private person who may own a college and like a jail.
Yeah, that's
The more
right.
money, the more people you get.
So
That's
it's a private good and a public good, but as Dr. Harder says, and as I said earlier, it will not serve this state well if we privatize higher education, although we're fast approaching that. We have to have the ability to produce more higher education, and if you privatize it, not enough of our population will be able to participate. That's the definition, of a public good. The reason you have to have public investment is not enough of it will be produced if you totally privatize it. As we said earlier, some of our institutions and the kinds of students they serve are already tapped out on what you're charging on tuition. We've totally flipped the source of funds to mostly tuition generated, and that comes with its a whole other set of problems. So the answer is multifaceted. As Dr. Alexander said, we need to give the institutions the autonomy to be flexible, to be competitive, and it's also true that the state has to invest more in higher education or not enough of our population are going to be able to benefit.
I think your point is well taken, and social benefits that are accruing to every individual because of other students graduating from college is still about 12% since it's been measured, 12 cents on the dollar. The states have been getting out of the higher education business since 1981 nationwide. We're down 48% in tax effort from what we spent in 1981 in public higher education. In fact, if these trends don't change, Colorado will be the first state not to spend a single penny on higher education, and that's in 2025. Iowa in 2029, Minnesota 2032, Michigan 2030, and subsequently each state gets out of the higher education business. A key part of this is finally getting federal leverage to force good state behavior. We do it in highways, we do it in Medicaid, we put matching funds on the table for increased support in those areas. For some reason, we've left higher education out of the loop. And now states have figured out that they can get out of the higher education business subsequently until they are out of it completely, and then the individual student ends up becoming the individual that pays for it entirely, which really is a disservice to that next generation. And it also ignores the fact that the baby boomers are still going to benefit from the social rate of return that they're going to get from their education. So this is indeed a national trend that needs national attention, where a state-federal partnership needs to get involved in this until otherwise we're going to have states out of the business. Within a decade, the first states will start dropping off the map.
And then only the relatively wealthy will be able to participate.
The other things I found in my time here in Louisiana, that these are national trends, but there's something distinctive about Louisiana. Louisiana and Pennsylvania, if I understand correctly, have the highest number of individuals who are both born in the state and stay in the state. So when you look at public higher education in Louisiana, we're not talking about educating people who are going to leave. By and large, the individuals are going to stay here, and they're going to be the teachers, the lawyers, the doctors, the plumbers, the welders. So we are really investing in staying here. The public higher education of the state of Louisiana comes directly back into the economic well-being of this community, as opposed to a lot of states where people leave and go elsewhere.
Dr. Salvo, I know you have to leave us in just a few moments, so if you want to give a final thought.
I think they covered it pretty well. Yeah, and I'm concerned about the same issues that you raised about, what we're talking about are autonomies, freedom to conduct our business without the layers of bureaucratic rule adherence that we have to go through now, to be more nimble, be more market driven. I hope that we never lose our public purpose, because as Dr. Ronald just pointed out, Louisiana needs the services of these institutions more than ever as the economy is changing and becoming more and more dependent on it. And we've got to be able to get our citizens the types of skills that they need in order to compete, or Louisiana's economy is not going to compete.
Thank you, Dr. Salvo. We appreciate your time, and thank you for coming in today. We'll go back to the questions.
I have 10 minutes here.
No questions here, Dr. Buckner.
Okay, well, I know this is a heretical question, but all of those tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars from football games and basketball games and the TV rights, does that all go just to support the athletic programs, or do the university general fund derive any benefit from all this?
We get about $8 million a year guaranteed. The rest is self-generated. We're taking a look at that to see exactly.
$8 million's not very much out of all those football tickets, is it?
Well, and with the SEC channel coming in, starting to come into play, I think in subsequent years, we're looking at, one thing we want to make sure we're doing is we want to make sure that athletics is self-funded, but they have an obligation to the rest of the campus, and we're one of the few campuses in the country that actually has a reallocation back to the university. Should that be more in times of difficulty? Probably, and we're looking at that carefully. We're looking at all of it. No, we are. We're looking at all of it. We just met with the SEC presidents, and the same thing. We want to take a look at this television contract to see how much of that could be allocated towards the institution and all of our institutions collectively. But I will say the other sources of revenue that I haven't pointed out. The main campus, our flagship institution, gets about $110 million from the state a year now. It's down to $110. But our faculty generate $500 million in federal research activities and dollars that come to the state of Louisiana from outside the state of Louisiana. So there's multiple revenue streams that we need to take full advantage of. And we took our presidents up to Washington last week and had our day on the Hill meeting with our legislators and our funding agencies. And our student newspaper asked, why are you wasting money to go to Washington? I said, because we have 500 million reasons why we're in Washington. And in some ways, a 5-to-1 ratio, you might just replace the S on our helmet and put an F for a federal university, because that's where the numbers shake out as we're moving forward. So any possible new revenue stream, we want to make sure that our fans that come to those games understand that this has a significant impact on the life of a university. And the university as I tell our folks over in Crowley, we're an A&M university, and the A doesn't stand for athletics. It's agriculture and mechanical engineering and everything associated with being a land-grant university. We need to make sure that all of those season ticket holders and everybody that comes to these games, watches us play, understands the situation we're in, because there is no athletic event without the university. And that's what we need to convey to them as well.
Now, Dr. Savoie, on your end with UL and recent successes and some of the money that's coming from bowl games and other TV events, how does athletics shape up and help with the budget? We can build on Dr. Buckman's question just from the UL standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Well, our athletic department is continuing on the path towards self-sufficiency. We're making some pretty significant inroads there. The university's support of athletics has declined as we've been able to generate other outside revenue. And the way you calculate those numbers is important as well. The largest expense in our athletic department is scholarships, where they pay us for the scholarships for students, but the truth is they're paying us. So it's really, money's going here and it's coming right back here. So the net effect of that is much less than what these budgets suggest. There are many other benefits that come from successful athletic programs. Just the pride in the community and support that's generated. We've set new records in clothing sales and paraphernalia sales in the last several years. That's because of the success of the program. Our enrollment continues to grow. I think that in some ways is due to the more notoriety of our athletic programs. And so there are a lot of benefits that you have to put into the calculations when you're coming up with a net cost. And it's not just the published numbers that people pay attention to.
And Dr. Hart, when SLCC fuels that basketball team, I'll be first in line.
Yeah. First in line with your check?
Yes, absolutely.
I want to ask y'all to expand more on the notion of autonomy. Everyone immediately thinks you're talking about tuition and fees, but there are other things that I know you're required to do that tie up your budget. I know Dr. Hardeman had a great example this morning.
Well, there are a number of things. The ability, how we purchase travel. The audit issue is significant. Office of Group Benefits, Office of Risk Management. For example, I'm a $40 million institution. I have to have the Office of Contractual Review look at any spending over $25,000. Where would that ever possibly happen in the private sector? The time, the personnel resources on my end and at the state end for something for so small is quite frankly, I think, a waste of public resources.
think, you know, this is my 5th state to work in, and as I said, my background as chief financial officer, it is harder to do business in this state than any state that I have ever been in. I mean, the time it takes to make good decisions and to move things along. I mean, just your, you know, your enterprise resource system. You know, all of these things that you should, your telephones, you know, all of these things that you should be able to do very quickly, it takes sometimes years. Ask Dr. Savoy. Years to be able to pull the trigger on something that can provide a lot of benefit and cost savings and greater service for the university. And it hampers our ability to be able to do these things. So I think, as you said, it's not just about tuition and fees. We have to be able to be flexible and nimble and make decisions that can help our institution.
Having said that, we had to qualify to become more efficient through the GRAD Act. And then we fought for 3 years to get our own procurement where we could buy rubber gloves in bulk for our hospitals and our laboratories. We fought 3 years to get procurement and our own risk management, because we're putting more into the risk management to offset higher costs than other state employees throughout the state. A history faculty member teaching a class does not have the same risk management portfolio as somebody who works on the highways. So what we did qualify to do, but that was just LSU. So we would like to see them have the same autonomies that without going through the 3-year process. We'd like to see these autonomies allow us to manage these resources, and allow us to work with our own pensions, allow us to do things that we know we can save a lot of money, and don't hold us to a standard that says only 1 or 2 institutions in the state qualify to become more efficient.
Yeah, in addition to having been in a number of different universities, I also served a lot of time in the military, and I thought the military was probably the least agile, the most basically centralized. And we even use the word closest to communism as you can find here, but I have had to put that aside now. Since I've been here in
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
We have found a whole new standard, shall we say, of centralization here. So.
I'll go to a question. Gentleman in the back will come up front.
Yeah. Over the years, I've been with a lot of different outfits, but just by myself today. I wanted to bring up a question, and there'd be a lot more implied, but all of you guys are real smart, so you can figure out what I'm saying if I don't quite get there. It's a fact that there have been enormous, horrific crises in higher education and in education as a whole in this state repeatedly throughout my lifetime in terms of funding. I mean, that's just a constant. And there's a desire to talk about autonomy, which the tradition of autonomy in universities is as deep as the tradition of universities themselves. That's an argument. I think that's vital. But we look at BP funding possibly coming into the state, and do we want to create more daylight between the state's windfall opportunities and the needs of public education when that money is available? I say we don't want to create more daylight there. We look at TOPS. We talk about a historic citizen of Louisiana, Taylor, his wife happens to be my cousin, who actually did work to get those funds set up, historical events that created an opportunity in this state and were supported. We look at 8G. We look at specific historic events. In other words, when you have been bitten by a dog, a savage set of dogs 375 times, it doesn't surprise me you're afraid of dogs. You know?
Yeah, we're running short on time. Your question.
Okay, but the thing is, dedicated funds and specific use of windfalls to solve problems seems also to have been part of the solution. And are you looking at that when you look at the strategies going forward? That's my question.
Remember the 2 words I used. One was sustainable. And that's exactly what we're looking at. So every year we don't have to go from pinnacle to pinnacle or valley to valley to valley, but rather sustainable dollars. Absolutely.
We're quick as a state and a nation to dedicate funds to an aging America. And we are the least likely to dedicate funds to the next generation of Americans that are going to create the economy that's going to sustain an aging America. So I think these dedications need to be looked at. We're the only one not dedicated. I just so happen to think that the next generation of students should be a priority, be a top priority for any state, including this one.
Yeah, and I think you'll find the leadership in higher education looking under every rock for any solution that can help us through the short term. The short term is the most pressing. I mean, if you go to the OR, you're less worried about your cholesterol if you're bleeding to death. Okay, so we have to stop the bleeding first, but the long term is still very important to us for the sustainability and the certainty that we need to be able to actually meet these challenges in workforce. So I do think long term, after this session, a much more methodical approach has to occur to look at the entire tax structure and the way in which we prioritize the funds that do come in to figure out how we can have a sustainable Louisiana that covers the needs of the entire state.
And our final question, please be brief.
Yep. For LSU, in 1982, LSU officials decided to ignore the guidelines of the Master Plan for Higher Education when they chose to duplicate the computer science and the PhD program in computer science here at UL. The Master Plan for Higher Education specified that particular program should not be duplicated. The criteria that they laid out said that number one, you have to present an argument that there is a need for the program, and number two, that you will, with your limited resources, be able to maintain a quality program. For 33 years now, LSU has been sucking limited resources from the pool of higher education to support an illegitimate program. And here we are today, as partly because of LSU's decision. We are where we are with students who cannot afford the tuition, the economic problems, the ethical example that LSU has set for everybody across the state of Louisiana. So I have 3 questions for LSU. Number one, for the public record, was LSU created to serve the state of Louisiana, or was Louisiana created to serve the whims of LSU? Number two, would LSU be willing to refund the state of Louisiana for 33 years of sucking those funds illegitimately and pay a hefty fine for it? Number three, would LSU submit to a fundamental restructuring of higher education to the end of providing a check and balance, an additional check and balance? The majority of the 50 states see fit to distribute the responsibility for graduate programs more to a higher percentage to institutions across the state. And it really raises the question, is it a double-edged sword for the state of Louisiana to establish any institution as the flagship, and provide somebody with an idea, well, because we're the flagship, we're free to ignore the guidelines and establish our own rules?
Thank you for your question, sir. Dr. Alexander, very briefly.
Can I jump in before, just to make a
Yes.
couple comments? Dr. Alexander was here in 1983.
Oh, yeah, I understand.
So I'm not sure that's appropriate to ask him to respond, even though he's much more capable to respond than anyone else in the room.
Well, questions 2 and 3, you could address that.
I want to hit that a little bit too. It's important for the state to have a lead research institution, a flagship institution, who can step out. He mentioned some of these things that they're doing on the autonomy areas. He also mentioned the land grant functions that they have, where they have locations throughout the state. It's important that there be a premier research institution to set the sights high. It's also important for institutions in our system to try to fill in some gaps and to specialize in some areas where we can get some things done in a complementary way. So I know there were battles 2 or 3 decades ago. People have worked real hard in the last 2 or 3 decades to smooth those things out. And I'm not sure that the relationship among institutions in our state has ever been better than it is right now. And so I don't know that it's beneficial for us to dig up things that happened in past generations. We're focused on what we can do for future generations. So with that, you can respond however you want.
I think of my years in Kentucky when we battled each other endlessly. The fact of the matter is, ULs aren't our fight. Our fight's against Ohio State. We're trying to get from 500 million to $1 billion to bring into this state to deal with more problems than Ohio has, and HIV research, coastal erosion. We're losing a football field an hour in coastal erosion. And we're on the cutting edge of obesity and diabetes research They're coming to us. When Sandy hit New York City, they called us. When the hurricane, and that's the research that we're doing in these areas to save Louisiana. The problems of Louisiana are the problems of LSU. And that's in the ag fields, that's at Crowley, that's in Shreveport, that's in our School of Dentistry, which we're trying to keep open, the only one in the state. And if we are the flagship institution, we need to be able to compete against Minnesota, against UCLA, against Ohio State. And we need the other universities to succeed as well. We've got more educational needs and research needs than we can handle. And our job is not to fight with each other. Our job is to give a clear path to as many students as possible. His students are my students. Her students are my students. These are all our generation. And that's the role of the flagship institution. If we want to stay the way we've been, it's like the crabs in the basket. One starts crawling out of the basket, the others pull them down. We can keep pulling each other down for years and years, and we'll never achieve what we can achieve as a state or as a higher education system or as collective institutions among all of us. And that's the way I see it. And each problem in this state is our problem.
Is the LSU still part of the funding problem for 33 years now, sucking limited funds?
Well,
I'll
point a statistic I'd like you to take note of. Of 50 flagship universities in this country, we have the resources to spend 46th. We're the 46th lowest spending institution among our flagship institutions. And in school funding cases all over the United States that have been ruled unconstitutional throughout the country, from Kentucky to Tennessee to Texas to California, the wealth of an institution is measured by how much money you're able to spend on a student. Well, we're at 46th. So if you think that we're overspending at the expense of all these other institutions, maybe we need to analyze our choices a little bit better. Because I can pick out a few other areas that we're overspending in a lot more easily than I can our students and our children.
I have to cut the discussion here. We're running out of time. We only have a few minutes left. It'll give us a few seconds for closing comments each. I'll start on my near side with Dr. Sawwa first. 30 seconds for closing comments.
I'll pass.
Dr. Alexander?
I'll pass as well.
Dr. Whitley?
I think it's about students and it's about workforce and it's about Louisiana. This is not a higher ed crisis, this is a crisis in Louisiana. And we have to start investing in this public good that is is education in our state in order to achieve what we can achieve in the state. So students and workforce, that's what we're trying to protect here.
Dr. Harder.
And I'm confident that the heads of our systems, our legislators, and our business and community leaders will understand the importance that we play in being a revenue solution to higher education and just not a black hole of dollars.
And Dr. Raleigh.
Just quickly, I use two words, agility and rigor. We need to be much more agile in meeting the workforce needs of the state. We also must be rigorous because the students have to be able to compete. And I think that's what we're really talking about, the future success of that student for the future success of this state.
Panelists, thank you again for joining us today and taking time out of your schedule. As we're talking about this in just a few weeks. For those of you who are here with us at the Press Club, if you're not a member of the Press Club, feel free to sign up. We do have forms. We'd be happy to take your donation and get you signed up or become a member right now. For those of you watching on TV, AcadianaPressClub.org is a place to go for more information. Stay tuned. More great programs on the Acadiana channel next. Until next time, thank you.
The preceding program was made possible in part with production assistance provided by AOC Community Media.